Welcome to this edition of the Presidency Debate supported by Microsoft. Our theme is an effective Digital Markets Act. What balance will achieve certainty for all stakeholders? I'm Brian Maguire here in Washington with the team in Brussels as well. Great to have you with us, and we want to hear more from you later on today. But before we get started, I want to introduce our excellent panel. I am delighted to have with us Casper Klinger, the Vice President of European Government Affairs at Microsoft, just to give some welcome remarks. Casper, great to see you.
Well, great to see you as well, Brian, although we are not physically in the same room, but hopefully we can be that in not too distant future. Listen, I'm not going to take too much of your time, but just really wanted to say it's a pleasure to help welcome you all to this event. And like everybody else, I think I'm looking forward to both a very interesting, but also I think a very timely discussion in the midst of the trilogue negotiations. And I think what is special about today is that we have a pretty unique opportunity to hear from policymakers that are directly involved in the discussions around the Digital Markets Act. Andreas Schwab, as well as Mathieu Vai, representing the European Parliament, as well as the Council. I think it's fantastic to have both of you with us today. But we also have two leading experts on economics and EU law, Christina Cafara and Alexandre de Striel. Really helpful to have your views on what is happening. Like everybody else, it goes without saying that in Microsoft, we've been following the DMA discussions very closely. And I think this event is a really excellent opportunity for us to learn more about the positions that are being negotiated, the economic and legal context, and perhaps more fundamentally, what the future of the DMA is going to look like. And sort of on a more personal level, I think I'm particularly looking forward to the discussion for two main reasons, or to focus on two issues. One is to better understand how policymakers and experts think that the DMA is going to be both effective and also durable. How do we guarantee that during the negotiations and during the adoption? I think the second issue that is going to be enormously interesting, and perhaps that's where a company like Microsoft comes into the picture, is how can the technology sector, bigger companies like the one I work for, really work with the European Union in achieving the DMA's policy objectives. I think we have a shared responsibility for making that happen as well. But of course, the DMA is not the only of the regulation being discussed right now, including during the French presidency. And I think when you look across the regulatory board, many of the issues being discussed really boils down also to the desire for increased sovereignty in the digital space we're living in. And I think Europe is already exercising a very strong and I think also very positive influence on how the world is managing the accelerated digital transformation we're looking at through the power of its sort of value-based regulatory framework. I think this is one of the areas where the EU is certainly a regulatory superpower. And I think the DMA has, and rightly so, sparked worldwide discussions about how to build more resilient, safe, and competitive digital spaces. And such is the Brussels effect, and such is the weight and importance of legislation like this. And I think what we're looking at is the DMA that will ensure that big players, including in the technology sector, such as ourselves, will really need to adapt to European values, European norms, and European regulations. And I just wanted to say that from the outset, that this is how it should be. And it's really also the essence of what we in Microsoft call Tech Fit for Europe, our need to adapt to the European reality that we are facing. So I think with these initial remarks, really looking forward to the discussion, and thanks again for everybody on the panel, and also a big thanks to you, Brian, for taking us through what I think is going to be a super interesting discussions. Over to you.
Many thanks, Casper, and also to Microsoft for the support today as well for this program. So now to our audience, we want to hear from you throughout the course of the program, and you can follow this discussion at #EA Debates. Please tweet your comments there. Our social media team will interact with you. You can put comments or questions, but we prefer the questions go to the Slido section and put it in the chat there, and we will bring those to the panel during the course of discussion. Now, we're not going to bring it all at the very end, so send them as soon as possible, and we'll begin to weave those through the conversation with our panelists a little later on as well. So you can get started on that. I'm sure the questions you have won't depend on what you hear from the panelists exactly. So let's just set out what we're talking about today. The European Parliament and the Council, as Casper said, are working with the European Commission to find a final compromise on the Digital Markets Act, the DMA, that aims to ensure contestability, fairness, and a level playing field in the European Union. And while the political directions from the Parliament and the Council have been set, more work is needed to complete the final text and make the DMA workable. Clear and predictable rules are necessary to provide legal certainty for gatekeepers and users alike, and for the DMA to be self-enforcing. In order to regulate dynamic digital markets effectively and proportionately, the account needs to be taken of the nature of the core platform services targeted by the DMA and the presence of different business models. Now, guidance will be needed to achieve effective remedies, and the Commission might need to play a stronger role in defining what gatekeepers should and should not do. Today, we'll discuss how the general obligations of the DMA apply across the diverse platforms covered by it, and how companies can best assist the Commission in achieving the DMA's policy objectives. Now, we have, as Casper said, a really distinguished panel today, and we're delighted to have with us Andreas Schwab, a member of the European Parliament, who will join us very shortly, we're told. And he is also the rapporteur for the Digital Markets Act at the European Parliament. We have Matthew Vey, he's the head of Digital Economy Department at the French Ministry of the Economy. Christina Cafara, she's a senior consultant and economist, and she's advised companies and regulators on antitrust and digital markets globally. Alessandro Destrel, he's the academic director at the Center on Regulation in Europe. So great to have all of you with us. Normally we just ask you for about 60 seconds introduction, but today we have a smaller panel and we can be a bit more flexible on the time with this as well. Andreas will get his opportunity to speak as soon as he arrives, but Matthew, perhaps you can kick off for us today.
Thank you, Brian, and hello everyone. I'm delighted to be here to discuss this important text, and it's a great honor for us, of course, in France, to be at the head of the council at this point in time. We built on the shoulders of giants. The previous presidency, especially the Slovenian presidency, made outstanding progress by achieving the general orientation, and this DMA is really a very significant part of the priorities on the agenda right now. As you know, the French presidency of the Council is put under the banner of a more digitally sovereign Europe, serving citizens in a sustainable way. And we are really in front of a text that is balancing two of our main goals in terms of the digital agenda for Europe. The innovation side and the regulation, obviously, because we need to have our own rules set. And I think what's interesting in the DMA is that both go hand in hand, this is a regulation that is designed to enhance, as you said, a level playing field, so that the largest players on the market can keep growing, but they are not overshadowing, and there's setting clear rules so that the startups, the emerging players can also strive on the European market and become, in turn, maybe larger than the others. So this is very important to keep in mind that the goals, the policy objectives of the DMA are both obviously regulating, ensuring that the behaviors are consistent with our European values, are consistent with with fairness on the markets, but also innovation, and that's behind obviously the contestability aspect of the DMA. So those are really two of the key messages that we're trying to balance: innovation and regulation in the same text. And I think this is really going to be the key line that we are trying to follow in the discussion with our colleagues from the Council. One thing that I think is worth mentioning as well is that the DMA is not the only text. I think Casper Klinger mentioned that earlier. There's a sort of a twin text about platforms as well, with the Digital Services Act, which is more about holding the very large platforms accountable in terms of content in terms of also illicit or dangerous products. We think both go really hand in hand, and we need to make sure we are keeping consistency across this package of acts. So that's, I think, for introductory remarks, I would keep it at that, and I'm looking forward to the discussion that will be taking place in this session. Thank you very much.
Matthew, thank you. And we're joined by Andreas Schwab also. Great to see you, sir. And let me have the floor straight over to you. All yours.
Hi, Brian. That's a pleasure. Sorry for being a bit late, but I've been listening to Mathieu, and I'm very happy that you do the conference today. I'd like to start by saying that we want an effective DMA, effective in enforcement. And to do so, we need to make sure that we give the European Commission enough flexibility to do a good job. And for a lawmaker, that's not that easy, because that means that our rules have to be clear, but still we know that applying them for specific business models in specific core platform services, it might be a challenge. And that's the challenge of the European Commission. And I think we trust a lot of power in the European Commission here, and we hope and we expect it to deliver on it. So as it has been mentioned, DMA and DSA are sisters. So I'm only the rapporteur on one of the two elements, but I think it's a very important element to show that our principles are not there to be in the air, but that are there to be applied. And therefore, as a parliament, after having stood up in 2012 and 2014 with resolutions where I was participating in the drafting, we are very happy that we see now that on all the negative and burdensome processes that we have seen in the last years on applying competition policy, we come now to a system which will be based on the key competition law principles, with another procedure that is creating as a regulatory tool, integrating also some sort of unfair business practices, unfair trading practices, making it an internal market instrument that helps to apply the ex-ante rules in a much better way. Now, what I would like to tell you is that we in the parliament had to balance for sure a certain number of different interests that we wanted to converge in the end. And therefore, our aim has to be to make clear that the enforceability of the DMA is not jeopardized, but at the same time, we create rules that the lawmaker has been installing. And that is at the moment also the key questions that we are addressing with the French presidency, who is doing a good job, but who has to speed up a bit the timing, because we want this law to be in place for the 1st of January 2023. And so far, we haven't been making good progress in the negotiations. So there is a real need to speed up. And to make the spirit of the ex-ante regulation a success, we have also been clear that the law itself has to be clearly, as all laws, but more clearly as normal laws, proportionate and obviously directing at unfair business practices and not against specific companies. And I'm very proud so far, we have never been speaking about companies. We have always been speaking about business behaviors that we want to fix. We want to create a certain balance of different industry interests. And we are not one-sided, but we are trying to see the big picture. So for that reason, we need the regulatory dialogue that we can get it right. It should be a dialogue that is done at the same level. Companies that do this dialogue have to expect the European Commission to be proportionate and serious, but the European Commission has to expect companies to act faster than we have seen in the last 7-8 years under competition policy, because the European digital single market is something where all users, all companies, all citizens have benefits to expect, have their rights to be heard, and have the right to see innovation and business models that are in the interest of everyone, that can be used. And therefore, the regulatory dialogue that we are foreseeing, that has already been mentioned, is about to make sure that it's about the Commission in the end to assess the situation on how gatekeepers apply the do's and don'ts, the rules and obligations of Articles 5 and 6, and under the conditions of a very clear understanding of the companies, the Commission then will give green light to the application. So there is the rules and obligations that are crystal clear, but all rules and all obligations have to be adapted in daily practice to specific business models. And we know that there is not one gatekeeper model, that are several different gatekeeper models. And to make sure that the rules are applied in the right manner, concretely, the Commission will, in that regulatory dialogue, discuss the application, and in the end, when the companies are clear about them, give a green light. And like that, we hope that we can speed up the process, make the best out of the digital single market, boost innovation, and allow gatekeepers to continue with very successful, economically successful business models that have sometimes become a bit uneven, but in the future should become more even again. Thank you so much.
Andreas, thank you. Thank you so much. Christina, over to you.
Thank you so much, Brian, and thanks to Euractiv for the invitation. Honor to be speaking on this panel. I'm an economist and a practitioner, and as it's appropriate, I need to do a very brief disclosure. I have worked adverse to Google and Facebook for parties and agencies. I have done some work for Microsoft, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, News Corp, and a few more. What I'm going to say, of course, is just my own personal view, certainly not the view of anyone I've advised. So what I'd like to do is take a step back a little and think about why we are here and what are the key issues that are facing us going forward with this great project. So fundamentally, we are here, and let's not forget it, we are embarking in this major project of regulatory design because antitrust has fundamentally failed in this space. In the main, it has failed, and this is for a number of reasons. It takes too long, agencies have been too slow, there are several steps behind the action, they've been trapped in precedent, companies are certainly also exploiting the process, and remedies have been utterly useless to modify the way we are. So given that failure, which I think is not in doubt at this point, we are pivoting towards this great regulation experiment in the hope that this experiment will be leading us to something which is more self-executing. We don't have to just kind of endure these endless delays, but somehow companies will adapt and behave in a way that is appropriate. There's been, of course, great pushback because most of the parties that are the target of this have been rolling out the usual arguments, the fear of unintended consequences, the hurting the small businesses, that we need to learn to walk before we can run, China, China, China. But this has not really gained much traction. I think progress has been very fast. And to the credit of Andreas and his colleagues in the parliament, we've seen this project really turbocharge through parliament and get us to a place that I think was, in some sense, unthinkable. I just want to tee up what are the 4 issues on the table. Some are slightly less kind of focus now, the debate as we are progressing in through this. Others are becoming really much more the focus of attention. One is who and what. Of course, who are the gatekeepers, how wide the net is cast, and what are indeed the core platform services that will be the target of this enforcement of this regulation project has been a big topic of discussion in the last few months. I think this discussion is settling down a little bit. It has become quite clear who the targets are, who are going to be the companies in scope. There is a bit more discussion at the margin about which of the multi-services that they provide will be ultimately caught by this. software application, what does it mean? But in the end, that kind of scoping question is kind of fading slightly. The discussion is also very much about the formulation of the rule, or it was initially about the formulation of the rules. As we all know, there are 18 rules in the DMA, Article 5, Article 6, and the initial version that emerged about a year ago drew a lot of attention because the rules were formulated in a way that was seen as being quite generic, quite general, and not targeted enough given the variety of business models, and bound to create some confusion. I think that, again, to the credit of Andreas and his colleagues, a lot of work has been done in the last year to sharpen the language, to sharpen the rules. And I think now it is the case that companies cannot be much doubt as to who the finger is pointed at. When you read a rule, you kind of know now. You cannot be pretending that this doesn't really apply to you. But I think as we're moving through this process, two other aspects are becoming really center stage that, of course, are being debated now and are going to be debated over the next few months much more. One is timeline. The timeline for this process is incredibly ambitious. I heard Andreas talking about the need to speed up, but I'm sort of thinking also about once the project has been approved, the timeline for actually identifying who the core platform services are and what they should be doing and whether they're compliant is compressed, is short. And that is, of course, the idea, because we want to defeat the kind of longers of antitrust, but it is a very ambitious timeline, which will create quite a bit of discombobulation and disconcert. And finally, there is the huge question of who does what. Which body will enforce and what will be the balance between centralized, decentralized, where the comparative advantages are. Of course, we are looking at a combination of regulatory function and enforcement functions. In some areas, the centralized model has advantages, but there is, of course, a big debate to be had, which is accelerating and amplifying around who does what, how remedies are going to be defined, what the competition law interaction is going to be, what the resources are going to be to actually implement this. And the final point I will make is that I think that this is great. It is something that we need. On the other hand, I see huge challenges and delays going forward, because starting from the designation of core gatekeepers, core platform services, to the interpretation of the rule, to everything, I anticipate there will be huge challenges, legal challenges. The enforcing body will be jammed with these challenges because some of this goes to the heart of the business model. And while we hear a lot of noise about, well, we want to be cooperative, I think that something that goes to the heart of the business model is not going to be adopted with any sort of benign enthusiasm. So I think that the process in reality is going to be dragged through a series of challenges, which are inevitable and we should expect them. But that makes the future all the much less clear from my perspective. Thank you.
Christina, thank you. You teed up some of those points, and we'll take a swing at them in just a moment. Alexandre, over to you. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much for the invitation. And I fully agree with what Christina said. And in a way, I will start from what she said and to build upon that. So first, I think the advantage of the DMA, and Andreas Traps has recalled that, is that we have detailed rule. And clearly, detailed rule are easier to implement than broad standard, which is envisaged in the UK. But that do not mean that it's easy to implement, as Christina was just recalling. And my starting point in thinking about enforcement is that self-execution is a myth in digital. I mean, we speak a lot about self-execution, but I sincerely do not believe it exists. And if you don't share my thinking, just look at what happened with consumer protection, where we have there more than 10 years of practice with black clauses, which have been implemented against big tech. And very often, it took more than a year for the Consumer Protection Authority to exactly know how to interpret those provisions to the different business model of several big tech. So I really think that if we can learn from that experience in consumer protection to know that self-execution do not exist. Now, that means that we will need a very robust dialogue and coordination mechanism among all stakeholders, which, as Casper was recalling in introduction, have a shared responsibility to make this DMA working. And, you know, I think the coordination that we need something which we have never seen that before in the EU. So I think really we should not underestimate the difficulty, as Christina was recalling. And, you know, I think there are 5 actors which will be involved in the system. You have the regulated gatekeeper, you have the European Commission, you have the national authorities, you have the stakeholders, so the competitor or the complementer of the regulated platform, and finally the national judge. And each of them will have a role that I want just to discuss in 1 minute now. So first, the regulated gatekeeper, it is clear that they have to participate to the dialogue. It won't necessarily be easy, as Christina was saying, because we are touching about their business model. But, you know, they have to have, as we say in competition law, the ability and the incentive to cooperate. That means that they have to have something to lose if they don't not cooperate, and that could be a very strong sanction. But they also have something to gain if they cooperate, and that means to be really listened by the Commission when designing and specifying some of the obligation of Article 6. So I think it's very important that the Commission really seriously engage with them and do not say, okay, that's clear enough, it's up to you to find what it is. I think really a lot of rules are, to me, not clear enough, and it's not because the Parliament and the Council don't do their job. It's because, you know, there is a limit in what a legislator can do in a very complex system as a very complex sector as the digital one. Now, regarding the Commission will have, and I think it's very important to see that, for the first time since it exists, so since the 50s, a role of a regulatory authority. The Commission is the European Antitrust Authority since the beginning of the EU, but it's the first time that the Commission is the regulatory authority, and we have a kind of Federal Trade Commission now in Europe. Now, that's very new, and that's very good if you believe in European integration. And paradoxically or ironically, the big tech are now the best allies of the European integration. But that means that it won't be easy, and there will be a lot of expectation, as Andreas Schwab has just recalled. I mean, the Commission cannot miss that. And it's a new role. So that means, I think, 2 things concretely. First, we will need to have a strong cooperation between DG Comp and DG Connect, as we, for instance, have seen that 10 years ago in telecom, where the 2 DG have cooperate very closely and very well. And I think DG Connect needs to be involved because there is a lot of synergies with the DSA that Mathieu was mentioning before. So, you know, those 2 acts, there is a lot of synergies in enforcement, although they are dealing with different problems. They are dealing with the same platform and the same algorithm. So a good cooperation between the different DG, I think that is possible because the Commission has done it. But something which is probably a little bit more difficult is I think that the Commission will have to evolve from a kind of a standard bureaucratic culture to a sort of geek culture, you know, because, you know, if you want to understand how those companies function, you really have to have a lot of computer scientists and data analysts in the Commission. And today, you know, as we know, the Commission don't have many. I mean, some of the regulatory authority have hired more and more people. But I think that is important, and I'm a little bit worried because we know that it's not easy for the Commission to hire new people. I mean, the process is extremely slow. So there, I mean, there is something to be thought through. National authority, third big actors. Here, of course, I think they should come in support of the Commission. I don't think that we should go to a decentralized approach. Given that most of the platforms which will be regulated have an operation all over Europe. So I think it's good to have a centralization, but clearly the national authority are closer to the field, and so they have an interest to be part of the system. And here I think we have a very good practice in banking supervision, where what do you have? You have joint investigation teams, so team from the national supervisory authorities and from the ECB, which is the European regulator for the significant bank. So you know that every inquiry is done jointly by national official and European official. I think it works well in banking supervision, and I think it could work well here as well. Then we have the interested parties, so the complementers of the platform or the competitors of the platform. Of course, they need to be here. They need to be heard, and I think there the work of the Parliament and the Council has improved quite substantially the text of the Commission. So that's very good. And finally, we have the national judge, because I mean the DMA will be a regulation which will have direct effect. And that worries me a lot, because it will be extremely complicated to enforce, and I'm not sure that every national judge in every cities of Europe will have the expertise to do that. Now, how the coordination is done between the judge? Through a preliminary ruling question to the European Court of Justice. So the national judge may ask a question to the Court of Justice, and this is what we see now with the GDPR, with a lot of questions going towards the Court of Justice. But that takes a lot of time. We have still a lot of unresolved issue now, and we are 3 years after the implementation of the GDPR. And second, the Court of Justice is not also specialized in digital, and there is no computer scientist or data analyst in the Court of Justice. So really, I think what we need here is a better cooperation between the Commission and the national judge, either the Commission adopting some sort of comfort letters to the regulated company saying, okay, this practice is okay according to us, so there is no possibility of having a private action against you, or the Commission adopting several guidelines which will then help the national judge to do their job. But I am really concerned that if we just base ourselves to preliminary ruling question, I mean, it will not work at all. So, in a nutshell, I think we have self-execution do not exist. I don't believe in that. We will need a strong coordination mechanism across the 5 main actors or categories of actors which will be involved. The Commission clearly will be at the center, but it's very important that the Commission has a strong dialogue with all the actors in the game. Thanks.
Thank you so much for that. We have a lot to digest there. What I want to kick off with, Andres, is we need to define what gatekeepers are. What's a user and what's a business user as well. What was the thinking in the Parliament in this, in terms of how the definitions were thought through and how this is going to work practically?
Well, the Parliament is a very intelligent institution, and we have understood that we have to find the right balance between focusing too much on what some academics have been recommending to us with the political viable system. And therefore, we have been deciding that we have to have a presumption on the one side and a very flexible tool for the Commission to integrate every company it seems to be clear as a gatekeeper to integrate as well. And therefore, the process of designation is fully in the hands of the European Commission. And I have no doubt that they will do an excellent job. If you allow me to come back on one comment that Alexandre has done, it's about that idea that gatekeepers should have an advantage if they abide by the law. I'm provoking a bit, but if they apply Articles 5 and 6. I think the only advantage they can get is that they get green light from the European Commission on a concrete dedication, on a concrete conviction on how Article 5 and 6 for a specific core platform service have to be applied. But they are not granted any exceptional tools or any leave or leeway from the law. They will have to apply the law as it's written in 5 and 6. And the advantage they can get is that the Commission gives them, without any procedural ruling in courts, a green light. But that means that they have to apply these green lighted areas and points then 100%. Because if not, the penalties will be very, very strong, and behavioral and structural measures are at the hands of the Commission in the future.
Thank you. Matthew, this is Rubik's Cube, which is in your hands right now as well. For you, what is the most challenging dynamic at play here? You spoke about regulation and innovation. We have these definitions which are still in flux to some degree as well. What are going to be the bottlenecks here in achieving something which is effective and deployable, and like we heard as well, it cannot be easily challenged in such a way that it hinders the actions of the market or gives an advantage to anti-competitive practices. What's the biggest bottleneck for you here?
I think Christina really nailed it. It's really about being effective, and the urgency that was mentioned by Andreas earlier should be really in the top of our minds, and that's why we took this approach actually with the DMA of ex-ante rules. Some of them needing obviously clarifications due to vast diversity of the gatekeepers' business models. But I think the spirit of the Act is very clear, and in no way can it be denied by any player. There are rules, they apply as soon as the text is enforced, and any tactics about delaying by asking questions and everything will be fought in front of the judge if need be. And I'm sure I can't see how a gatekeeper, once even considered, could say, well, until I have my final green light, I'm not changing anything. I think that's we're talking big players here with a very strong sense of responsibility. I think we'll get to that pretty efficiently. Having said that, the challenges that Christina was mentioning and Alexander was very detailed about it is about bringing into the Commission, with the support of the national authorities as well, as much talent and skills as required, because these rules are pretty detailed in some ways. They have to be applied in different situations, and they have to be monitored as well. And there will be challenges. There will be requests to consider infringements. And the experience from the antitrust environment, for instance, is that you need to have a lot of expertise to assess how a gatekeeper is or is not rolling out a system that is unfair or that is creating, for instance, self-preferencing. So I think that this upskilling of the authorities is a key priority. In France, we've built a number of teams enhancing the capacities of our authorities recently. We've also created a joint mutualized team of data scientists that operates either for content regulations or economic regulations, the competition authority, or for policy setting. And this is absolutely crucial that the Commission starts right now enhancing this. I know there are consideration being given to how to organize, but the skill aspect is going to be critical.
Andreas is nodding in agreement there as well. But we're all familiar with the speed of change at the institutions, and what Alexander talks about, this need for a geek culture as well. Are any of you optimistic that that geek culture can be achieved within a relatively short space of time to make the DMA actionable by using real experts, real analysts who understand the complexity of these topics? Let me ask Christina, just a quick recap on Christina's comments earlier. Antitrust has failed, you're trapped in precedent, remedies are utterly useless, and this is a great regulation experiment. Optimism's not really your thing on the DMA, is it, Christina?
Well, no, I'm not a pessimist. I think that resources is going to be a fundamental bottleneck, right? Because the current plan is that when the law eventually comes into force, then we're going to have very compressed timetable. So 3 months for the gatekeepers to identify themselves. And then the commission needs in 3 months or 90 days to just confirm that. And then there is 6 months for a compliance statement. So what's going to happen is all these companies are going to produce their very lawyered compliance report. And then you're going to have 25 people in the commission, no more. 25 is the number for 2022 and 2023, initially looking at these compliance reports. And there is going to be a number of core platform services which are intended to be compliant. So the task of just sifting through this and forming an opinion against the background where, while, as I say, the rules have been sharpened, there will be lots of questions, tons of questions about how does it actually apply to me? And, you know, let's have a discussion, let's sit down, and I want to talk to you. Fundamentally, and this is something Alexander teed up well, we are looking at several functions that are being pulled inside the DMA. So there is designation, engagement to rule as they apply, compliance assessment, supervision, enforcement for non-compliance. All of these things are not, apart from the latter, which is enforcement, are not second nature to DG Competition, for example, because it has never been a regulatory body. So there is a combination of regulatory kind of functions that don't come natural to an enforcement agency, and then an enforcement function. But those regulatory functions need to be inserted at speed with a team of 25 to 80 people at in full force. And that is going to be enormously challenging, which is why, of course, we are all clear that this cannot be a sole, solitary, solipsistic effort by DG Comp, that there needs to be contribution by the national authorities. And indeed, I mean, both Matthew and Alexander mentioned it, skills. I mean, skills is going to be the big question, because you can't just kind of shift a few economists and lawyers from DG Comp and just kind of make them suddenly become these kind of tech regulators. The CMA here in the UK has done quite a good job over the last few years of tooling up. They have data units, they have sort of data scientists that work together with the lawyers and the economists, and that has been a gradual process. But we absolutely need that. Otherwise, this is going to be jammed into a complete bottleneck in which no one is going to be progressing this fast.
Christine, just Andreas wants to reply, but just before give it over to Andreas, you know, we heard France has achieved these kind of data units. UK has done this as well to some degree. Clearly, the Commission has opportunity to do that as well. The question is really the speed of action and how quickly they can organize a team like that in a more complex environment. You know, are you optimistic that that can be done in a reasonable time? And if it can't be done in a reasonable time, should there be some sort of pause on the implementation of the DMA until those teams are in place? Or if you don't have those teams in place before this is implemented, are you just asking for trouble then?
Well, I don't see pause as being realistic. I think we need to get going. Otherwise, we're going to fall into the trap of antitrust, which is we've done nothing for years with all the best will in the world. But there is a problem.
Okay, thank you. Andreas.
Well, I wanted to add to what Christina has outlined correctly. It's about competences for sure, but it's also about the procedural setting. And what we do with the DMA is that we change the burden of proof. And this is an enormous change. It's a paradigm that changes here, because in the future, it will not anymore to be for the Commission to investigate the latest details, to prove the latest elements, and to wait for the latest court decisions to be supportive of the European Commission's position. But it's up to the Commission from the very first day to ask the gatekeeper to prove what they want to do. And if they don't, they have a problem, and they will have to go to court, and they will have to prove everything, and they will have to go to the latest court. And like that, the burden of proof is a tool that will, in any event, improve the procedural position of the European Commission. And then it's true, also competence and knowledge is needed more than in the past. But there is also some knowledge already, some experience. And I think with that change of burden of proof, that can play out absolutely for the best of the market and for the better of innovation.
Thank you. Alexander, you wanted to reply, and then I want to take some questions from our audience as well. Alexander.
Yeah. So on the question of the competence and so on. So clearly, I think Andreas has a very important point that the burden of proof is going in the right direction, and that is very important. But in any case, even with that kind of burden of proof, I don't think the Commission alone will be able to do it. That for sure. And so I think really, in a way, the Commission should become a platform of itself and orchestrating an ecosystem of enforcement. So really, I mean, the Commission alone will not be able to do it. That's extremely clear. And so we should organize a way of cooperation between the Commission and many other players to do it. And that's a little bit the case in the DMA, but I think it's better the case, this concept of ecosystem of enforcement in the DSA. For instance, the fact that the Commission under the DSA, which collect data or a national regulator and can give it to a research institute to analyze the data, provided this research institute is vetted, I think that's a very good way to be helped by those data scientists, which may be happy in a research institute, but don't want to live in Brussels and work for the Commission. So I don't understand why we don't have the same kind of possibility in the DMA that you have in the DSA. So that's one thing. The second thing is, even if the Commission managed to orchestrate an ecosystem of enforcement, mistake will be made. It's inevitable. And so the question is how you learn from your mistake, because to do one mistake is not a problem. To repeat a mistake, this is an issue. And I think maybe we really need to have those kind of feedback mechanisms. For instance, that if the Commission realized that a specification done for an Article 6 obligation is not done well, to re-specify. I think that's very important, that the Commission learn from the mistake and adapt the system. I think that's how it could work, ecosystem of enforcement and learn and feedback loop to learn from mistake.
Thank you. Christina, quick comment?
Very quickly, I do agree with Andreas that the sort of the shift in the burden of proof is fundamental here. It does change the dynamic very seriously. But at the same time, the reason that I'm cautious and in some sense pessimistic about how far really that takes us is that we are adopting by design a law that effectively challenges business models, sometimes very fundamentally. And so I think it is inevitable that the response will be incredibly dug in and defensive, because the kind of posture that I hear out there is, but wait a minute, they are wanting us to change the fundamental business model in ways that has not been premised on evidence that the behavior is anti-competitive. So we will challenge until kingdom comes, because this is not what we're going to do easily. This is going to be a world in which our business model is undermined by the changes that are expected. And so I'm throwing a note of caution that while the change in expectation and in the burden of proof helps, it is still a major shift, which will inevitably drive a very strong resistance legally and with every means at everybody's disposal. I don't believe in cooperation.
That's terribly cynical. Also, just to follow on that, if there's a lack of evidence of anti-competitive practice, why would the rules be there in the first place? Is this just too much regulation where it shouldn't be there in the first place? Do these gatekeepers, do these companies have a fair point when it comes to that? You don't have evidence, why are you punishing us? Is that fair? Christina?
Oh, no, this is not quite what I'm saying, but there is certainly a strong body of view that intervention, which is transformative of a business model, needs to be premised on evidence of an antitrust quality, that conduct has been anti-competitive. And this is a different paradigm. And so you can expect there is a great deal of anxiety and resistance to it. That's what I'm saying.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we have loads of questions. I'm going to scan through some of these now. Andreas, first one is for you. It's from Jan Topfer. He's a Master's Political Science student at the University of Vienna. Mr. Schwab, who can we expect to have the final word on enforcing the DMA, the European Commission or national regulatory agencies in member states? And can you also please refer to the role of the Digital Markets Advisory Committee in the enforcement process? Andreas, you touched on some of this already.
First, it will be, and there is a very large majority for that in the Parliament and also in Council, it will be the European Commission. And secondly, we have created, with an amendment that I proposed myself to my colleagues, that high-level group of experts, where member states probably will send the heads of national competition authorities. And apart from that, we have the advisory committee that is also advising the European Commission on how to improve legislation, making delegated acts. And it will be important that the European Commission uses both committees to make its decision as best understood as possible and makes use of these institutions. Because what we see is that how the European Commission will apply the DMA will be in its hands. How member states come up with further legislation and how national competition authorities apply the national competition rules is at their hands, and we need a very strong coherence in the application, and we will call every time the Commission to make sure that this coherence is in the interest of users and citizens.
Thank you. Matthew, I want to bundle a couple of questions together for you here. So Mark Dempsey says, how do you plan to respond to reports that the US government are planning new pushes against the DMA? And one other on this as well. And let's find where it is again. So this is also on, it has disappeared from my screen. So basically a report that the Biden Commission is also looking at pushback on the DMA. It had, if I recall, there are 8 different points of contention. There we go. It's from James Colligan. Their previous one in the fall, and this concerns the DMA. What do the panelists, in particular MEP Schwab, think of these concerns? Matthew, I want to put that to you first. What's the context of this and pushback that you may or may not get from the United States administration as well, Matthew?
Well, it's been widely reported that the U.S. government has been formally engaging with providing their views. I'm not sure the qualification of pushback is a correct one. I think the policy objectives of the DMA are really shared in Washington, as the debate over there is showing, with very similar projects being on the table of Congress as well. So I think there are ongoing discussions, including the ones that have been referred to about these 8 points. Those are arguments that are being shared. I'm not sure any of them is absolutely new to the discussions, at least in the Council, but I think also in the European Parliament. So it's a worthy contribution from the government of the United States. Having said that, it's one input. Many others are sharing their inputs at this point, as you can imagine. But it's being considered. But there's nothing that is going in the way of the DMA itself. It's a few items of consideration that may or may not be in the part of the debates in the trilogues. But I'm not sure we have any pushback now that it's been clarified. And Andreas mentioned that earlier, that the scope, the point of the DMA is not to target any specific companies, is not to target companies from a specific nationality. And so once we've come across this aspect, we have a constructive dialogue with everyone, including the US.
Thank you. That was nicely downplayed. Okay. Andreas, do you want to reply to that?
Thanks, Brian, for the question. And Mathieu has already outlined the principles. I was just before Christmas in the US. I met plenty of government officials from different ministries, but also from the civil society. And I can only tell you if you have a closer look in the American debate, we share common values and we share the same principles, and we share also the basic concerns that we want to fix with the DMA. And everyone who is saying something else is a source that has to be considered with concern, because what concerns of all of us is that we don't want to jeopardize innovation. We don't want to destroy markets. We want to open them. And I think most Americans have understood, as these companies are very often sitting in the US, that opening the market is most of all something that they will also have a profit of, but also European citizens, and therefore it's a win-win situation. And we will be very strong and tough that this will not be watered down at the end of the trialogue. And I feel very safe that this is something that we will also be able to maintain, because it's important. We want to have that Europe remains the continent where the law is right and where not those that are big are right.
Thank you. Okay, another couple of questions here from Maria Luisa Stasi. For Professor Destrel, first of all, she says, Prof. Destrel mentioned 5 actors to be involved in the regulatory dialogue, but end users were not in the list. How to make sure they are adequately involved too? And she adds, some amendments were put on by the European Parliament which go in this direction, but we might need to go further and slightly change the narrative. DMA is about business users and end users' rights alike. Alexander.
Yes, I mean, I think the DMA is mostly a B2B law, and it is protecting, opening the market, as Andreas has just mentioning, and that is indeed very important for innovation, to be sure that the innovation is not concentrated in the hands of a few players. But I mean, the idea is mostly to protect those innovators, and then the consumer will benefit from that. I'm not sure that they should directly be so evidently involved in the DMA. There is consumer protection for them. I've just mentioned that at the beginning. So I'm not sure that we should complexify the law. It is already quite complex. I just want also to make one point of what Andreas was saying about the committee helping the Commission. I think it's very important that the national competition authorities are involved, obviously, but not only. Also, all the regulatory authorities should be involved, because, you know, competition law and competition authority are in generally good at doing prohibition, but they are in general less good at doing obligation, you know, positive obligation. You have to share data or you have to interoperate. And I think there, in general, regulatory authority have proved to be better. So I think it's very important for those kind of obligation that not only the competition authority are involved, but also the regulatory authority.
Okay, thank you. Christina, you wanted to come back on the US?
Yeah, I wanted to come back briefly about on the US posture. I agree entirely with Matthew and Andreas, and really I think this impression that some may have that the Biden administration is in any way pulling back is I think not borne out by the facts. I don't speak, of course, for anyone, but observing what goes on. Of course, there is an onslaught of lobbying, some of it extravagant. You know, in the US, you play particularly the China card at every turn. If you regulate us, China wins. And this is something that in Europe we don't really have in the same way. But of course, this is a card that's been played very, very hard by some of the targets. But I think this shouldn't overwhelm the fact that in reality, there is enormous support for going forward with this. And it is bipartisan support, which is very important. It is not just the Biden administration. You've had bipartisan bills. You have now the Klobuchar-Grassley bill, which is the successor to Cicilline and Bach, and has been marked up and is now out of the committee, and importantly, with significant support from Republicans. Ted Cruz supported it, and with him 6 Republicans, which is enormously significant for very different reasons. Of course, Republicans worry about freedom of speech, and Democrats worry about market power, but there is a confluence of interests. And then, of course, there's another bill by Lee on ad tech. So there's quite a lot going on. Quite whether it is going to actually cross the House and make it into law is another matter. But it is not remotely the case for anyone who spends any time in Washington that we, are the crazy Europeans and we are not really being followed by Washington. They are looking at what we are doing very carefully, and they're on the same page in the main.
Doing a deal with Ted Cruz. Good luck, anybody who tries that. And you're right, in China, even if you go around the bus stops close to the White House and Congress, you see this anti-Chinese message woven into things with national debt, anything to do with tech, but national security as well. So perfectly right on that. Let's take another couple of questions for a moment. Lydia Detting, I think maybe Andreas will try this one. It's quite technical. Will the methodology of the calculation for end and business users for the designation of gatekeepers set out in the annex of the DMA be aligned with the methodology to calculate recipients and users of platforms in the DSA? Do you follow that? Okay, go ahead.
Well, first of all, if I may say so, active business users are a term that is already in the air since quite a while. And we don't want to change it, but active means for all colleagues that active is not just a visitor. It's an active client who is making transactions. And like that, which because it's important for the definition also of platform size and of gatekeeper status, and has a lot of implications. For sure, there needs to be a streamlining between the DMA and the DSA. And as Mathieu has already lined out before, it's not the only one that we have to care about. There is also, for all questions around GDPR, sensitive data and personal data. They will also to be treated in the same manner, in a coherent manner in both files, maybe one element only in one file, the other for that aim only in the other. And like that, we are working closely together. I'm meeting nearly on a daily basis with my colleague Christel Schaldemose, and we will do the utmost to make these laws together a very coherent but a very strong European piece of legislation where we hope that we can also reach the gold standard in the world. And I have to tell you something, this is a common interest that we share with our American friends, because in the end, the shareholder value principle, which has made the gatekeeper so big and so heavy and so rich, it's something that is bound by the law. And no one has any doubt, not in the US, not in Europe, that the gatekeepers are to abide by the law, and therefore the law will remain. And that is not always all over the place the case. And therefore we are very trustful that it makes sense to do it together. And in the end, also to come to common solutions with the Americans, because if we don't manage it together, it will be very hard to apply these rules in a transatlantic manner.
Thank you. I want to come back to that with Matthew in just a moment in terms of the global context and the gold standard. But just one more question for Alexander, which is from Thomas Mansour. If the Commission is to be involved in ensuring uniform application of the DMA by national courts, would that be similar to the Commission issuing competition law guidelines, or should the Commission have even more competences to guide or bind the judiciary? Alexander.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent question. And the question is, what is indeed the legal value of those guidelines to national court? And what is complicated is that the Court of Justice itself give a little bit different view depending on whether we are in antitrust, where in general, the Court of Justice give less legal forces to those antitrust guidelines than to regulatory guidelines in telecom, for instance. And so I hope that those guidelines will have to be taken into account by the national judiciary, like it is the case in telecom. And the solution in telecom is comply or explain. So either the national court should follow the guidelines of the Commission or explain why they do not want to follow them. Okay, I really hope that will be the strategy. Maybe we need to have, I know we are late in the process and probably too late, but a provision like we have in, for instance, the telecom code, that the judiciary is bound to take into account, to take the utmost account of those commissions of law instruments.
Thank you. Matthew, we're in the last 10 minutes here, and I want to get each of you an opportunity to wrap up in a few moments as well. But let's talk about the global dynamics here as well. And as Andreas said, the gold standard in the world. And if we look at the example of GDPR and the global impact that has had, even the Chinese modeling their own response on this to some degree as well. How do you see, as you manage this this dossier, how do you see this impacting global dynamics, not just in terms of how American companies, international companies play in the European market, but the spillover effect and what benefit can European companies hope to see from this, or European consumers hope to see from this as well? Matthew.
What a broad question. Thank you. So doing a little perspective is always quite difficult. I think there are two key things here within your question. The first one is we need to set those rules that need to be as up to date to the challenges we're seeing in the digital environment as possible. And this digital environment changes pretty fast. There are new technologies coming in. We're talking about metaverse. We are talking about there are talks about Web3 and so on. And we need to have the concept as robust as possible so they can address at least most of the issues that will emerge in the coming years. We've had success in the e-commerce directive, which was, as you can remember, inspired by similar US regulations at the beginning of the year 2000. It lasted a while. And what we're doing here must have as a goal to be, of course, flexible, but provide the framework for the next 10, 15, maybe 20 years. And this time we have in Europe the opportunity to set this framework first, work with others who share our values in order to maybe expand this. And I think in the US, we have very constructive discussions, sharing the same policy objectives, as I was saying, and Andreas and others were saying the same thing. We'll see how the UK is going, but actually there's pretty much a lot of similarities with their approach as well. And we will be having we will be providing European companies with the most advanced legal framework within which we hope they can thrive, we hope they can grow, and so that in the future, we are positioning ourselves not only on the regulation front, but also on the innovation front, as I was saying at the beginning.
Okay, thank you. Christina, on this as well, is it possible to in any way future-proof the DMA, or is the dialogue element between the Commission and the gatekeepers, for example, the only way to keep this an organic response and all the different dynamics we've discussed during the program today? Is this future-proof, or are we starting always 2 steps behind where we need to be because the technology is advancing so quickly? Christina?
Look, this is really the big experiment that we are embarking on, and we don't have a choice because antitrust, as I say, hasn't worked. Antitrust really is 7 steps behind and has not enabled us to keep tabs with what is going on. So this is an experiment. How is it going to play out? I think, of course, remains to be seen. I see that there is a considerable advantage to us in Europe in leading this charge because, of course, as a continent, we have a natural advantage here. We have been pushing this, and we are ahead. Frankly, our credentials in antitrust are quite faded now because from being certainly a forward-looking enforcer, the penny has dropped that we really haven't achieved very much in practice. And the US is certainly the transatlantic has turned, and in antitrust a lot is happening. So we really need to make this work somehow. But I think that it is going to take time, and it is going to be the product of various trial and errors. And it isn't going to be smooth sailing. It is going to be challenging.
Thank you. We're pretty close on time, so I want to ask each of our panelists for their final soundbite as well. Alexander, let's kick off with you. What's your takeaway for today?
I mean, I want to paraphrase the Clinton strategist, and you remember it says it's the economy stupid. Here, clearly it's enforcement stupid. And so I really think that we need now, especially the people not directly involved in the negotiation, because I know it takes you all your time, your day and your night, but Christina, I and others worked seriously on enforcement. And this is what I want to do with the think tank I'm involved in CER, but I think everyone should really now focus its attention or her attention on that.
Excellent. We'll get the T-shirts with its enforcement stupid printed up by the end of the week. The first one's over to you, Alexander. Thank you for that. Matthew, over to you. Final remark.
Well, I'm really enthusiastic about this punchline from Alexander about enforcement. I think this is absolutely key, and maybe the anecdote is, we're working on this text and it's taking all our time at the moment, and we having very constructive discussions, but it's so intense. And sometimes the teams think, once they're concluded, what's going to happen? We won't have anything else to do. And I'm always reminding everyone, it's just a start. We are just starting on the path of this experiment, as Christina was mentioning, and it's going to be about enforcement and making it making it have an impact on the way we are creating a digital Europe.
Thank you. Christina, over to you.
Well, I don't want to end on a pessimistic note. I don't want to do that. On the other hand, I have been going on for some time that business models matter. And to the extent that this is a regulation that absolutely, as I said before, goes to the heart of business models, there is going to be a significant challenge in getting these businesses to cooperate, to understand where this is going, because it is ultimately premised on a view ex ante we have that we can re-engineer these markets in ways that work better for consumers. The approach over there is, but we are not clear that that is true. What we're doing is good for consumers too. So there is going to be a significant amount of back and forth before this can go places. But we have to try. There is no alternative.
Thank you. Andreas, last word.
Well, I would say that after it's the economy is stupid, we have too often heard it's the algorithm stupid. And now definitely that's not anymore the case. Now it's enforcement. And that is a positive message because, again, the law will be applied and it will be applied fast. And that is our task now. And those who work day and night on it are concerned about that. And those that advise us, they think about this. And like that, this conference has had a very positive impact because in the end, we know that we want to apply the law in a same and a coherent manner cross-Atlantic. And that's what we hope we can achieve.
Excellent. Thank you so much. We've had an excellent discussion today. I really appreciate the contributions from the whole panel today. So thanks to Andreas, to Matthew, Christina, and to Alexandra. And also to our audience as well. You've been super engaged. Sorry if we didn't get to all your questions, but thank you for putting those to the panel. And to our social media team, you don't see them, but they put in a lot of work behind the scenes. And my thanks to them. And to the production team, Zoran, Malta, Bonja, Tamara, and Elisa. And also to Microsoft for their support today as well. We love working with the Microsoft team. It's been a pleasure. So to our audience, stay tuned, keep commenting online. Our social media team will continue to engage for the rest of the day and tomorrow on that as well. And you can share this program with your friends and family. And tomorrow, I think as well, it should be available, if not today. So many thanks and wish you a good rest of the day, whether you're here in the United States or in Brussels. I'm Brian McGuire.